Chapter 56. Go on. Pinch her bum. The man with the cloven thumb dared her. Ray didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his remark. Jolanta and Pascal's greeting had developed rapidly. Their professional handshake had turned into a brief embrace, which soon ended up as a light kiss on the cheek, lips, and now tongues were definitely involved. Ray had looked away, but she could still hear the wet smack of their mouths and the quickening of their breath. She cleared her throat loudly and deliberately. The couple ignored her, and Hans found buttons as what lay beneath their clothes became more and more interesting. "Right, I'll leave you to it then," she said, and started to go. A guard drone hovered into the doorway, blocking her exit. "Or perhaps I'll stay." The two board directors loved testing people's boundaries. It was one of their many frivolities. They restricted themselves amongst peers, but when forced to spend time with people lower down the hierarchy, Jolanta and Pascal liked to see how far they could push things. Departments of middle managers had been known to sit in embarrassed silence as the two satisfied their lust on the conference table before them, moaning and rolling amongst the coffee dispensers, creamers, biscuits, and assortments of fruit tea. Fortunately for Ray, the director's schedule was tight, and with an animal grunt, they released their clinch. "Good afternoon." Jolanta span on her heel, her face glowing. "I'm Jolanta So." She offered her hand, but Ray made no effort to greet her. "I'm sure this has all been very disorientating," Pascal said, unashamed of the erection he was now sporting. "But you are safe, and we intend to keep things that way." The directors sat down together. Ray chose to remain standing. "So, you've been to the RMZ?" Jolanta tried to catch her eye. "I've watched the footage, and what I saw was quite dazzling. You practically danced through an entire battlefield." Ray cast them a look so steady and full of hate, it was painful to witness. "You corporate cunt sent me there," she spat. "A mistake," Jolanta replied. "And Ray," Pascal said, "we weren't personally involved. Jolanta and I work at a certain echelon. There are so many, shall we say, granular aspects of our organisation. We simply can't get involved with everything. Sadly, mistakes are made." "Liar." Ray's conviction impressed Jolanta. The Panmo tech hadn't hesitated. She cocked her head in curiosity. "Ray, I'd like to ask you about what Pascal just said. How did you know he was misleading you?" The self-righteousness drained out of Ray as she felt the focus of Jolanta's attention. Her neck stiffened. She kept silent. "Because you couldn't really know, could you?" Jolanta continued. "Not for sure. Not unless someone told you he was lying." Her eyes glittered with anticipation. "Did someone tell you he was lying, Ray?" A moment passed before Ray looked away, ashamed and confused. Jolanta glanced over to her colleague. "It's important that we're honest with our friend here. Anything short of the truth will not be good enough." She turned back to Ray. "And the truth is that we were briefed about your dismissal. It wasn't our decision to take initially, that much is true, but we were briefed. What's more, we had the power to intervene, but, regretfully, chose not to. So you see, although it wasn't personal, we were complicit in your dismissal.
Yes,
Pascal nodded.
that's quite correct.
So, Jolanta let the moment build for a beat or two. I'd love to hear what he has to say about that. Faced with Ray's silence, Pascal asked the waiter drone to go and fetch something a bit stronger than sparkling water. When it returned with a decanter of whiskey and a set of crystal glasses, Ray sat down and fumbled herself a drink. The first disappeared quickly, and she poured herself another. She waited a moment for the whiskey to sink in, then peered at Jolanta. I want him out. Him. It. Whatever. Some fucking code. Whatever it was she put in me. Negatives, I don't know. I want them out.
Of course you do,
Pascal replied.
Most disturbing, I'm sure. And certainly that's something we can explore.
Ray, we'd like to help. Jolanta struck an understanding tone. But first, we need to make sure we're all on the same page. So, before we go any further, what exactly do you know? What did Perdita tell you about the offshore negatives? Ray shook her head, a bitter look in her eye. Nothing. She didn't say a bloody thing, not to me. We've been tracking Mr. Dromio for some time, listening, watching, tracing the assets that he and Perdita stole from a subsidiary of ours. Did you hear what she told him back in that marsh? Ray nodded. That she'd encoded some data during our metastasis session? Used me as a hiding place? Some sort of AI program, I guess. Some fancy fucking avatar for your latest software.
Well, almost,
Pascal said.
He is an avatar of sorts, but not for any of our products. He's, well, how to put this, he's you, Ray. He's just another aspect of your own mind.
Ray had been about to take another slug of whiskey, but she stopped and put the glass down instead. This time, she didn't need to look to the man with the cloven thumb to check whether Pascal was lying. She knew this was true. Knew it with certainty, like a stone knows where to go when you drop it. But she frowned uneasily. Yes, Ray, what is it? Jolanta urged her on. But he's such a cock. Yes, well, Jolanta smiled, apologetically. I mean, he really is. He's such a cock. How can that be me? Am I really that much of a bellend? I had no idea.
Quite. That's exactly it, Ray,
Pascal explained.
You wouldn't have any idea. Originally, the offshore negatives were a product of a market research project well before my time. They were working on communication below the threshold of conscious awareness. The vague influence advertisers had, the general swaying of public opinion, it wasn't good enough. With the advance of technology came a more specific solution, a direct, precise, and measured effect on the unconscious impulses of consumers. Ray found herself nodding slowly along to his account. They designed simulations to include an experimental dataset, the offshore negatives. which mirrored the subject. It would copy their behaviour and act in a way that closely resembled the subject themselves. Do you see? It simply observed what they did in the sim, their habits, their tendencies to do or say one thing or another. And then it mimicked them, making similar decisions, saying similar things. Clearly, it developed. The more time subjects spent in the simulation, the more closely they were observed, the more accurately they were mimicked, until the offshore negatives embodied aspects of the subject that even they weren't aware of. You're the panmotech, Ray. People's image of themselves is very selective, wouldn't you agree? We're constantly rewriting, editing, and redacting the story of our lives. And from a sense of self-preservation, I suppose, we leave a good deal out from these narratives. Our base instincts, our darker motives, our wilder urges. But the negatives don't. They observe everything. The subject's hidden feelings, the memories they're most ashamed of, the fear, the rage, all observed, adopted, and reflected back to them in the simulation. But those old programs were unstable, the coding experimental. Each time the subject entered the sim, the offshore negatives would manifest in a different form. One day a potted plant, the next a pet goldfish, sometimes a person, sometimes not. But there was always one defining feature that remained consistent. Could be a certain pattern, a kind of shape or material, a particular noise, anything. But it helped the subject identify the offshore negatives. I understand your experience includes something about a deformed finger. A cloven thumb, Ray said. Split from here to here. Yes, just so. Well, as I said, the project aimed to tweak consumer preferences. The study continued for years, but to no avail. In fact, if anything, it affected the test subjects in exactly the opposite way. The more dialogue that took place with their unconscious minds, the less susceptible they were to suggestion. They could say that the more they knew of themselves, the more independent they became. Subjects were faster to assess their own needs, quicker to reject unnecessary attachments, more confident, more assertive. If the subject suspected that a product was not aligned with their personal well-being, then their rebuttal was instant and powerful. So, eventually, they mothballed the entire project. Simulation technology advanced. Other products came out of the labs. Group sims and primitive metastasis rigs had more exciting results. And the focus of research shifted to fields with better potential for monetization. Since then, the offshore negatives have received scant attention, held on a server somewhere, passed along from company to company through decades of mergers and buyouts, acquisitions and takeovers, forgotten, dormant, until two terrorists tried their hand at industrial espionage and hacked a few neglected files, poorly secured with outdated encryption, the offshore negatives. Little more than a myth, just another online conspiracy theory. And then one of them rendered the code down and re-encrypted it in a modern metastasis simulation with a fully trained, neurologically adjusted panmotech. executed the rest of the cluster mid-simulation and created a unique set of circumstances where, apparently, the negatives responded uniquely. But our documents show that the offshore negatives were always confined to the simulations. Without a connection to a rig of some sort, they should remain dormant. We have no explanation for what is happening to you, Ray. Not yet. And as for what we saw in the RMZ, the way you anticipated events around you, I assume that was him. Ray nodded, hypnotized. Yes, well, again, unheard of. If I were to guess, I'd say it might be associated with some of the automatic functions that take place outside of normal awareness, that perhaps the negatives have built a stronger bridge between your so-called animal instincts and your cognitive mind. But that's pure speculation. We simply don't know at this stage.
Yolanta chipped in. Take what happened a moment ago. This man the man with the cloven thumb. Yes, Ray. He knew that Pascal wasn't being entirely honest, didn't he? Ray nodded. I guess he can detect all sorts of tells in our body language, little things that perhaps you'd dismiss if he didn't point them out to you. He didn't put it quite like that. She nodded at Pascal. He just said, your fuck cushion here was full of shit. And that's all. Oh, and that he'd like to knock down your back door and whitewash your kidneys.